3 families, gone without a trace. What was meant to be the vacation of a lifetime turned into something far darker, far more terrifying. A luxury cruise that promised relaxation, adventure, and memories for years to come. But what it delivered was something no one could have predicted. Imagine for a moment boarding a ship eager for a week at sea. The sun shining, the ocean breeze fresh, and the world feeling like it's at your feet. 3 families, each with their own dreams, their own plans. The Kellers, the Martins, the Williams. They arrived with excitement, ready to explore the vast ocean, spend time with their loved ones, and experience the luxury of the Elysian cruise ship. But what awaited them wasn't paradise. It was a nightmare that began unfolding long before they realized anything was wrong. As the ship set sail, it was business as usual. The families laughed, enjoyed their time by the pool, and admired the beauty of the endless blue sea. They thought it would be a week of relaxation, but they were wrong. Something dark was already aboard that ship, and with every passing hour, it grew stronger. Unseen but undeniable. Something, or someone, was waiting. What happened to them? How did 3 entire families vanish without a single trace? No signs of struggle, no screams in the night, just gone. The Elysian ship was found drifting days later, abandoned, with no trace of the passengers. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. And the truth? The truth behind their disappearance is not one that anyone is ready to face. The mystery goes deeper than any simple accident. It's a story that has been buried, untold. A truth that refuses to be discovered. But you're about to learn it. What began as a peaceful vacation slowly turned into a nightmare that none of them would ever escape from. For the families aboard, what seemed like a dream vacation was actually their last. And as the days went by, the horror grew, not just for those who disappeared, but for those left behind. No one had answers. No one knew what to think. The Elysian cruise became a ghost ship, lost in the middle of the ocean, and the fate of those aboard became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of our time. With each passing moment, we uncover more whispers, more clues, leading us closer to the terrifying truth. Was it a curse? Was it something far more unnatural? Or could the horror be something even worse, beyond our understanding? What happened to those families was no accident. They didn't just disappear. Something far darker than anyone expected was at play. And as you hear their story, you'll start to understand that this is a mystery far more terrifying than anyone could ever imagine. Stay with me, and let's uncover what really happened as the truth behind their disappearance begins to unfold. The answers will chill you to the bone. This is the story of the Elysian cruise, a luxury vacation that turned into one of the most terrifying disappearances in modern history. What was meant to be a peaceful escape, a dream come true for the passengers, quickly morphed into an enigma that continues to haunt those who have heard it. This is not just another missing persons case. This is a story of families who vanished, of unexplained events that defy logic, and of a ship that became a ghostly vessel in the middle of the open ocean. It all began on the 15th of July. 3 families, all from different walks of life but united by the excitement of a summer cruise, boarded the Elysian. Their hopes were simple: time away from the stresses of everyday life, time to bond, to relax, to discover the beauty of the open sea. For the Kellers, a family of 4, it was a long-awaited break from their busy jobs and their hectic schedules. For the Martins, a couple and their teenage son, it was a chance to reconnect and unwind after a year of struggles. And the Williams family, a group of first-time cruisers, were eager to experience everything the Elysian had to offer. The Elysian was the epitome of luxury. It was a beautiful, massive ship designed to offer its passengers everything they could dream of and more. From the moment you stepped aboard, it felt like a floating paradise. Its sleek design, modern amenities, and endless decks lined with sparkling pools and expansive restaurants made it the perfect choice for an unforgettable vacation. The Elysian was renowned for its 5-star service, world-class entertainment, and the promise of an incredible journey on the open sea. As the family set sail, they marveled at the incredible views of the ocean, the vast horizon stretching before them. There was nothing but calm seas and clear skies, and for a while, everything felt perfect. They explored the decks, enjoyed the lavish dining rooms, took in the breathtaking ocean views, and laughed as they shared stories with other passengers. The sound of laughter echoed in the halls, the clink of glasses could be heard throughout the ship, and for a moment, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But there was something else too. An unspoken tension. Something quiet, almost imperceptible, that lingered in the corners of the ship, unnoticed by the families, but never truly absent. They didn't know it yet, but they had entered a space where things were different. The Elysian was not just another cruise ship, it was something more. But no one aboard had the faintest clue that this journey would become something much darker than anyone could have imagined. By the end of the first day, the excitement was still palpable. Everyone was still on high spirits, eager to see what the next day would bring. But when night fell, things began to shift. The atmosphere on the ship changed in a way that couldn't be put into words. The lights dimmed a little too low, the sounds of the ship creaked in a way that didn't feel entirely natural, and passengers began to notice small oddities, doors that didn't open all the way, strange shadows passing in the hallways, whispers in corners that no one could quite place. It was as if the ship itself was starting to feel wrong. But still, no one suspected anything. After all, they were on a vacation, a dream vacation. There was no reason to worry. The Elysian was supposed to be safe, a beacon of luxury. There was no way anything could go wrong. And yet, as the families slept in their cabins that night, an invisible shift was taking place. What they thought was a dream cruise was, in reality, a nightmare just waiting to unfold. The families never imagined that this would be their last vacation. They thought they had plenty of time to enjoy the ocean breeze, to take in the sights, to savor the luxury. But what followed was a nightmare beyond comprehension. What happened to the Kellers, the Martins, and the Williams? How did they simply vanish from a ship that was supposed to be their sanctuary? What should have been a perfect vacation turned into a haunting mystery, and the questions only deepened with every passing day. No answers. No explanations. Just a cruise ship found adrift, with no sign of the families, no trace of where they had gone. The Elysian was found, but the passengers were gone, vanished. It was as if they had never been there at all. This is not a simple story. It's not just about a missing persons case. This is a mystery wrapped in layers of secrets, whispers, and an ocean that holds its own terrifying truth. What really happened on that cruise? The families didn't just disappear. Something happened to them. Something that no one is prepared to face. In the coming moments, we will begin to unravel the layers of this terrifying mystery. What went wrong aboard the Elysian? Why did those families never return? And more importantly, who or what is behind their disappearance? At first, everything seemed perfect. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the ocean. The water shimmered like glass, stretching endlessly into the horizon. The Elysian cruised smoothly across the waves, its passengers soaking in the beauty of the sea, breathing in the fresh salt air. There was laughter on the decks, the sound of children playing in the pool, and the hum of excited conversations as families enjoyed the beginning of their vacation. For the Kellers, the Martins, and the Williams, it felt like a dream come true. Everything was calm, everything was serene. But the calm was only surface deep. As the ship moved farther into open water, something started to change. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like a shift in the air, something that you couldn't quite put your finger on. The ocean, which had been so calm at the start, began to feel different. The waters, once inviting, now seemed heavier, more oppressive. The ship continued to sail forward, but to the crew, it felt as if the ocean itself was resisting them, pushing back in ways that didn't make sense. The crew, experienced as they were, started to notice the oddities first. They couldn't explain what it was, but it felt like a weight pressing down on them. The ship's engines, normally a comforting hum in the background, seemed to echo differently, lower, almost as if the ship was struggling to move forward. The usual rhythm of the waves hitting the hull, that steady sound that had been their constant companion on so many voyages, began to sound wrong. It was like the water itself had changed, like it was no longer welcoming, but quietly hostile, like it had something to say that no one wanted to hear. The captain, who had seen his fair share of odd weather patterns and unusual conditions, felt it too. The sea didn't feel right, and the strange sense of heaviness, the oppressive air, was starting to get to him. The ship was on course, but it was as if the world around them had subtly shifted. Something was off. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, gnawing at the back of his mind. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ship, the first real signs of trouble began to manifest. It was dinner time, and the passengers were seated in the grand dining room, enjoying the exquisite meals the ship had prepared. The atmosphere was still light, filled with the usual sounds of clinking cutlery, laughter, and clattering dishes. But then something strange happened. A low hum, faint at first, began to rise from below deck. It wasn't loud, at least not at first, but it was there, and it seemed to be coming from deep within the ship, as if the Elysian herself was letting out a sound that no one could explain. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the ship's engines or the sound of the water against the hull. It was something different, something unsettling. The hum was low, almost imperceptible, but it cut through the air and drowned out the usual noises of the dining room, making every conversation feel muted, like the ship was pulling everyone into its strange world. As the hum continued, something else started to change. The air in the dining room thickened, carrying a strange smell that wasn't there before. It wasn't the fresh, salty ocean breeze that usually drifted in through the open windows. No, this smell was heavier, fouler. The scent of salt water mixed with something rotten, like a decaying fish left to rot in the sun. It wasn't overpowering, but it lingered in the background, making the air feel thick, like you were breathing in something that didn't belong. For a moment, no one said anything. People exchanged looks, wondering if anyone else had noticed the odd change. But most of the passengers, eager to enjoy their meals, tried to brush it off. After all, they were on vacation and nothing could spoil the mood. But the crew wasn't so sure. They exchanged nervous glances, and the captain made a mental note to check the air conditioning system later. Something was wrong, but it was hard to pinpoint exactly what. Later that night, as the ship sailed deeper into the open ocean, things started to get even stranger. One of the children, a young girl from the Williams family, woke up in the middle of the night. She had heard something, a whisper, faint but clear, calling her name. She thought it was just a bad dream, but as she lay there in her cabin, the whispers grew louder, and she felt an icy chill in the air. It wasn't a wind, not from an open window, but a cold that seemed to seep through the walls. She called out to her parents, but when they came to her room, the whispering stopped. They chalked it up to her imagination, something that happens to every child on a new adventure. But the girl knew what she heard, and she wasn't the only one. The Martins, another family aboard, began to experience strange occurrences of their own. The lights in their cabin would flicker at odd times. It started as a brief flash here and there, like the bulbs were struggling, but soon the flickering grew more frequent. It wasn't just once or twice, it was almost every night, like the lights couldn't decide whether they wanted to stay on or off. It wasn't the kind of flickering you'd expect from a power surge, and it wasn't confined to one part of the ship. It spread, slowly, subtly, but steadily. And every time the lights went out, the ship seemed just a little darker, a little colder. The crew was starting to feel it too. Some spoke of a strange sound that seemed to follow them, like a scraping noise, almost imperceptible, like something dragging against the ship's hull from below. Others mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallways late at night, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone they knew. There were no guests in the halls at that time. No crew members walking about. Yet the sound was unmistakable, echoing through the silent corridors. But at this point, it was all small things, easy enough to ignore, easy enough to write off. The ship was large and the ocean vast. These strange events could have been explained away if only just. But as the hours passed, something else began to take shape, something darker, something that couldn't be ignored any longer. It wasn't until the first night that things truly began to go wrong. That was when the disappearances started. That was when the Elysian became a different place entirely, and no one aboard would ever be the same again. It was the third night when the first family vanished. The night was quiet, the ocean calm. The ship cut through the dark water like it had done every other night, moving with a steady rhythm. But when the morning came, everything aboard the Elysian would change forever. The Kellers, a family that had been so full of life the day before, had disappeared. Gone. Just like that. At first it didn't make sense. How could a family simply vanish without a trace? Their cabin, once filled with their belongings, was now completely empty. It was as if they had never been there at all. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no evidence of a forced entry. It was as if they had just disappeared into thin air. The cabin door was locked from the inside. There was no way anyone could have entered or exited without a key, and there was no sign of the key being used. The bed was unmade, but it wasn't in disarray like it might have been if there had been a fight or a hasty exit. The blankets were tossed aside, but not carelessly. The luggage was still packed, sitting untouched in the corner of the room. It was as if the family had planned to go somewhere, but they never left. The eerie stillness in the cabin was deafening, no sounds of the usual creaks or hums of the ship's movement. Just silence. At first, the crew tried to convince themselves that the Kellers had simply left. Maybe they'd gone out for a midnight walk on deck, maybe they'd gotten lost in the corridors or decided to explore another part of the ship. But deep down, everyone knew it didn't add up. The ship was huge, yes, but not big enough for a family of 4 to vanish without anyone noticing. And yet, no one had seen them leave. No one had heard a thing. The captain was called to the scene, but even he couldn't explain it. He looked at the cabin door, at the bed, at the untouched luggage. There was nothing that suggested the Kellers had left in a hurry. The room looked normal, as though the family had just stepped out, but there was a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach. He dismissed it as a possible miscommunication or an accident. Maybe they'd simply gotten off the ship in a hurry, or gone overboard somehow. But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't that simple. The strange sensation that had been lingering for days now seemed more real, more pressing. The ship, which had once felt like a place of safety and luxury, was now starting to feel different, unsettling. It was a feeling that no one could shake, and the unease spread quickly. As the crew continued their search, the passengers were told not to worry. The captain reassured everyone that the family was most likely just lost somewhere aboard the ship. But as the hours passed, the feeling of dread intensified. The first signs of something bigger, something darker, began to show. By the time the sun had set again, another family had vanished. The Martins, a couple and their teenage son, were gone. Just like the Kellers. The same eerie silence in their cabin. No sign of a struggle. No indication that they had left. The room was still, the bed unmade, their luggage untouched. It was as though they had simply gotten up and walked away. But no one had seen them leave. No one had heard a sound. The panic aboard the ship grew, but it was a quiet panic. More like a creeping fear that no one could fully articulate. The crew was on edge, searching every inch of the ship, but the Elysian was vast and the families' cabins were far apart. The idea that two families could simply vanish from a ship full of people without anyone noticing seemed impossible. And yet, there they were, gone without a trace. It wasn't just the disappearances that were unsettling. Strange occurrences began to escalate around the ship. The lights started to flicker more often. Not just once or twice, but repeatedly, almost as if the ship itself was flickering in and out of reality. The lights would come on, then dim, then go out entirely for moments at a time. It wasn't the usual electrical problem. It felt different, almost deliberate, as if the ship was trying to warn them. But it wasn't just the lights. The air grew colder too. Passengers reported cold gusts of wind rushing through the corridors, despite the warm, still night outside. The ship was in the middle of the ocean, miles away from land, but the sudden chill was palpable. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the feeling of being watched, as if something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of the ship's glow. And then there were the whispers. At first, no one wanted to admit to hearing them. They were too faint, too indistinct to be certain of, but they were there. Soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere. Passengers in the hallways began to exchange nervous glances as they hurried back to their rooms. Some said they heard voices calling their names, others said they heard laughter or soft footsteps following them down the empty halls. The shadows in the corridors also seemed to move differently. They seemed to stretch unnaturally, like something was skimming just beneath the surface of the walls. But when you looked directly at them, they were gone, leaving you unsure whether it was just your mind playing tricks, or if something far darker was at work. The ship's crew was stretched thin, their nerves fraying as the strange occurrences escalated. They continued to search, to investigate, but no answers were forthcoming. They found no signs of forced entry, no windows broken. No one had seen the families leave, and yet they were gone. The captain, despite his earlier assurances, was beginning to lose his composure. This was no longer a simple miscommunication. The ship had become a place of fear, a place where things moved just beyond the edge of understanding. And the disappearances weren't the only thing plaguing the Elysian. With every passing hour, the whispers grew louder. The cold winds came more frequently. The shadows in the hallways seemed to grow longer, stretching into places that shouldn't have been possible. The Elysian had become a ghost ship, a vessel adrift in a vast ocean, its passengers trapped in an escalating nightmare that no one could escape. And with each new disappearance, with each strange occurrence, the terror aboard the ship grew. There was no safe place, no comfort. The Elysian was no longer just a cruise ship. It had become a prison, its walls closing in on everyone aboard, and no one knew who would be next. The search began calmly at first. The crew members were determined, and the remaining passengers rallied together, thinking that if they worked quickly and thoroughly, they would find the missing families. The idea of people just going missing, especially on such a large, luxurious ship, seemed impossible. The captain spoke with authority, assuring everyone that the families must have wandered off somewhere, maybe just temporarily lost. But as time passed, their efforts to search every inch of the Elysian only led them further into confusion and dread. At first, it seemed like the missing families would be found soon enough. The passengers were separated into groups, tasked with combing through every part of the ship, from the top decks to the lower, almost forgotten parts of the vessel. The Elysian was vast, so vast that it seemed like there was nowhere on board that could be considered out of reach. The corridors stretched long and the rooms were numerous. Yet, every crew member and passenger who entered a room or searched a corridor came back empty-handed. No one had seen the families leave, and the ship was starting to feel far too large for its own good. Panic started to spread in subtle ways. Whispers turned into worried conversations. The ship, which had once been so full of laughter and excitement, now felt hollow. The air around the passengers was heavy with confusion, dread, and uncertainty. People began to glance over their shoulders at every turn, as though something was watching them, waiting. The once cheerful voices now carried an edge of fear. But the crew wasn't the only group on edge. As the night wore on, something unsettling happened. The ship itself seemed to resist the search. At first, it was nothing more than an odd feeling, something everyone tried to ignore. But the crew couldn't shake it. They noticed small, subtle things that didn't make sense. The ship's layout, one that everyone knew so well, was starting to change. Hallways that led to the same rooms that suddenly seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was like walking in a maze where every turn brought you to a dead end. Some doors led to stairwells that shouldn't have been there, while others opened to rooms that didn't even exist on the ship's map. The crew began to question their own sense of direction. Was the ship playing tricks on them, or were they losing their bearings? A member of the crew swore they had walked down the same corridor twice, only to find it led to an entirely different area. A few others reported seeing hallways that had once been familiar now blocked off by what appeared to be new walls that hadn't been there earlier in the day. And when they checked the ship's map, something even stranger became apparent. The map didn't match the reality of the ship anymore. Rooms were missing, stairs had been moved, and sections of the ship appeared to be shifted. It wasn't just the ship's physical layout that was wrong. It felt like the ship was shifting, changing, almost as if it had a mind of its own. The captain, despite his best efforts to remain composed, began to grow more frantic. He ordered a complete inspection of the maps and ordered the crew to double-check everything, every measurement, every room, every deck. But every time they returned to the maps, something didn't add up. Areas that were marked clearly on the map didn't exist, and new corridors appeared where there should have been none. The ship itself seemed to be fighting against them, refusing to cooperate with the search, as though it was hiding something. As if that wasn't enough, the atmosphere aboard the ship started to shift. The usual sounds of the ship moving through the water, the gentle hum of the engines, were replaced by a suffocating silence. It wasn't the calm quiet that came with nighttime sailing. This was a deep, unsettling quiet, one that crept under the skin and made every corner of the ship feel like a trap. It wasn't just the silence, though. There was something else, something that felt like it was pressing in from all sides. And that's when the real horror began. It started as a faint sound, at first nothing more than a murmur. But as the night grew darker, the sound grew clearer. Footsteps. Soft, slow, and deliberate. But the strange part? The footsteps weren't coming from anywhere anyone could see. It wasn't the crew walking down the hallways. It wasn't the sound of passengers moving about. The footsteps seemed to come from within the walls of the ship. They echoed down the long, empty hallways, creeping from one part of the ship to the next, always just out of sight. Each time the passengers and crew thought they were getting closer, the sound seemed to move further away, vanishing into the ship's maze-like structure. At first, the crew thought it was a trick of the mind, tired, stressed from the long hours of searching. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were there every night, growing louder, more persistent. Some crew members insisted they heard more than just footsteps. They heard voices too. Quiet whispers, as if someone was talking just beyond the walls, just out of reach. There were even reports of shadows moving in the corners of their eyes, figures that darted out of view as quickly as they appeared. The crew was no longer sure if the sounds were real or if they were imagining them, but the passengers were beginning to believe they were not alone. The fear began to spread even more. The corridors felt narrower now, the walls closing in. The ship, once a place of adventure and excitement, now felt like a tomb, its halls echoing with whispers, its rooms filled with cold drafts that made everyone shiver despite the warm ocean air outside. The ship was no longer just a vessel, it had become a living nightmare. As the days dragged on, the search grew more desperate. There were no answers, only questions. The families were still missing, and the ship had transformed into a place no one wanted to be. Some passengers tried to leave, some demanded to be let off the ship, but no one could explain why. The Elysian had become a floating prison. The crew too was rattled, their nerves on edge. They'd searched every corner of the ship, and yet they couldn't find anything. The ship was vast, but it wasn't the ship's size that made it terrifying anymore. It was the feeling that it was hiding something no one could uncover. It wasn't just the disappearing families or the strange sounds or the shifting layout of the ship. It was the feeling of being trapped on a ship that refused to let them go. The Elysian was no longer a luxury cruise. It was something much darker. And as the crew and passengers continued their search, they came to a terrifying realization. The ship wasn't just hiding the families, it was hiding something far worse. As the days passed, the Elysian felt different. It wasn't just the strange disappearances that had already occurred. It was the sense of unease that had begun to settle over the ship. The crew, who had once seemed confident and composed, now carried an air of tension. Every action they took, every word they spoke, was laced with nervous energy. The Elysian, once a symbol of luxury and safety, now felt like a ship adrift in more than just the ocean. It felt as though it was adrift in a sea of secrets, dark secrets that no one dared speak aloud. The captain was no longer the reassuring leader he had once been. His calm, commanding presence had begun to fade. He started showing signs of strain. His hands trembled slightly as he held the ship's wheel. His eyes darted nervously to the horizon as though expecting something to emerge from the ocean. His orders, once firm and decisive, were now tinged with uncertainty. When he spoke to the crew, it was clear he was no longer sure of what was happening. His assurances to the passengers seemed hollow, his words drifting into the growing uncertainty that surrounded him. As the tension aboard the Elysian continued to mount, the whispers among the crew grew louder. At first, they were subtle. Small mutterings passed between deckhands and waitstaff, conversations hushed when the captain passed by. But soon the whispers couldn't be ignored. More and more crew members began to speak in low voices, exchanging uneasy glances, their faces drawn with fear. It wasn't just the missing families anymore. It was something bigger, something deeper. The ship had a history no one was willing to talk about. One evening, after a long day of fruitless searching, we spoke to an insider, a crew member who had been aboard the Elysian for years. He had seen more than most, but he had never spoken of it before. It was a risk for him to say anything. In fact, he had made it clear that he had no intention of talking until now. The ship had seen strange incidents before, disappearances, unexplained events, but no one had dared bring them up. For years, the crew had been trained to stay quiet about what had happened on past voyages. And now, with the current events spiraling, the truth was beginning to slip out. This wasn't the first time the Elysian had been involved in strange disappearances. There were rumors, quiet whispers among the crew of other voyages where passengers had simply vanished. No one ever spoke of it publicly. If the captain knew, he never let it show. The ship had a dark reputation, one that was carefully hidden beneath the gleaming surface. Every time something unexplained happened, it was buried. The missing families from previous cruises, the strange occurrences, the disappearing passengers, it had all been swept under the rug, forgotten, or so they thought. As the crew members spoke, we learned of the Elysian's dark history. Every time something like this had happened, the crew was instructed to stay quiet. No one was allowed to talk about it. There were always official reports, always explanations, miscommunication, accidents, bad weather, but the crew knew better. They had seen it happen too many times, and now it was happening again. Whatever force was behind these disappearances, whatever dark presence was at work, had returned. The crew member didn't have all the answers. No one did. But he was certain of one thing: the Elysian wasn't like other ships. Something about it, something in its history, seemed to attract the darkness. It wasn't just the ship's size or its beauty, it was something else. Something hidden in the ship's very design. Perhaps it was the materials the ship was built with, or perhaps it was something far older, a curse that had followed the ship for years. Whatever it was, the crew member couldn't say for sure. But he warned us, no one aboard the Elysian was safe. Not anymore. The warning had barely settled in when late one night, something happened that confirmed the crew members' fears. One of the more senior crew members, a seasoned officer who had been with the Elysian for nearly a decade, vanished. He wasn't just anyone, he was someone who had seen it all, someone who had worked every department on board. He was the last person anyone expected to disappear. But that's exactly what happened. He simply vanished, gone without a trace. No clues, no signs, just like the families before him. His room was found locked from the inside, his personal effects untouched. But the most unsettling part? His radio was left behind. It was faintly crackling, emitting static that seemed to come from nowhere. When the crew tuned in, they barely caught a garbled transmission. His voice was weak, strained, but still audible. "It's happening again." The message came through clearly enough, but it cut off abruptly, leaving only static. And then silence. The officer was gone, and no one knew where he had gone. The ship felt emptier, more unsettling. The disappearance of yet another crew member sent shockwaves through the rest of the team. The message had said it all: it's happening again. The crew's worst fears had come to life. Whatever had taken the families, whatever had caused the strange occurrences, was still aboard the ship. It hadn't left. And now it had taken another victim, one of their own. The message was clear. The Elysian was no longer just a ship. It was something far worse, something darker. And whatever this was, whatever was behind these disappearances, no one was safe. The crew, despite their best efforts to keep it together, began to show cracks. They had no answers, no explanations, and no way to stop it. The terror that had once been limited to whispered rumors now hung over the entire ship, growing heavier with each passing hour. The passengers, too, were becoming aware of the strange happenings. Some had already begun to suspect that something was wrong. And now, with the disappearance of the officer and the cryptic message left behind, there was no denying it. The Elysian was a cursed ship, and it wasn't letting anyone leave. The Elysian had always been known for its luxury, its high-end service, and the seemingly endless comfort it offered to those who boarded. But as the days went by and the disappearances grew, something became clearer. This wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just a vessel for traveling across the ocean. It was something darker. A vessel bound to a long-forgotten history, a history soaked in blood and mystery. Something no one aboard the Elysian could have prepared for. Something no one had ever been told. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just a series of unfortunate events. No, the Elysian itself was cursed. And this curse wasn't new. It had been there from the very beginning. Built on land that had been tainted by ancient rituals, The ship had long been tied to a dark history that no one dared speak of. A history buried beneath layers of luxury, hidden in plain sight. The truth was there, hiding in the wood, the steel, and the very ocean that surrounded the ship. For years the crew had kept quiet about it. The captain, even in his most calm moments, knew the truth. He had to. But there was no way he could have told the passengers. No one wanted to hear it. No one would believe it. And so, the story of the Elysian's curse was left untold, sealed away like a secret no one dared disturb. But now, as the ship sailed on and the terror grew, the past was coming to life. The curse was not something that could be ignored, not something that could be hidden forever. The ship had been built over a place tainted by ancient rituals that reached back centuries to a time when the land was used for dark purposes, for purposes that no one alive today could understand. The land on which the Elysian was built had once been the site of desperate, forbidden acts. Dark ceremonies, driven by fear, by power, by an uncontrollable hunger for control over life and death itself. The rituals were meant to summon something from beyond, something that could grant power, but instead they invited something far more dangerous, something that tore through the fabric of the earth itself. Those who performed the rituals on this land thought they could control it. They thought they could bind forces they didn't fully understand. But the forces they called upon had a mind of their own. And once summoned, they were never meant to be bound. They slipped through the cracks, hidden in the land, in the very earth, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. And the moment had come. The ship had been built over this cursed land. Its foundation was soaked in the darkness that had been born there long ago. The Elysian was a ship that carried more than just passengers. It carried the weight of that curse. And as it sailed through the water, the curse sailed with it, ready to claim anyone who dared board. At first it was subtle. The crew didn't feel it at first, nor did the passengers. But as the ship continued its course, something began to shift. The air started to grow colder, as if the ship was moving through a different part of the ocean. One that no one could see, but one that everyone could feel. At night, the temperature dropped unexpectedly, and passengers reported feeling the air thicken, the chills sinking deeper into their bones. It wasn't the kind of cold you could explain by the change in weather. It wasn't just the ocean breeze, it was something else, something that seemed to reach out and touch you, something that made your skin crawl. Then came the smell. It started faintly, like the musty odor of something forgotten, old, damp, and rotten. But as time went on, it grew stronger. It clung to the upper decks, to the rooms, to the hallways. It wasn't the smell of decay from food or rubbish, it was something far older. Something that had been left behind for years, something that had been sealed away and was now coming back, clawing its way to the surface. It smelled like a mix of wet earth, sea salt, and something decayed. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was suffocating, like it was pushing into your lungs, making every breath feel thick and heavy. The crew tried to clean it, to get rid of it. They scrubbed, they aired out the ship, but the smell lingered, and no matter what they did, it wouldn't go away. It was as if the Elysian itself was holding on to something that no one could escape. And as the smell lingered, the groaning began. The ship, which had once been solid and stable, began to shift. It wasn't a simple creak of the wood, or the usual sounds of the ship's movement through the water. No, this was different. It was deeper, more resonant, as though something was stirring beneath the surface of the ship. It was a sound that came from within the hull, from somewhere deep inside the ship. It wasn't just the sound of metal stretching or wood cracking. It was a groan, like the ship itself was alive, like it was waking from a long, painful slumber. And with every groan came a sense of unease, like the ship was moving on its own, as if it was guiding them to something, leading them towards something. The more the crew searched for answers, the more they began to understand what they were up against. The disappearances, the strange occurrences, the eerie sounds, all of it was linked to the land the ship had been built on. The land that had been soaked in blood and rituals. And it wasn't just the Elysian that was affected by the curse. Everything aboard it had become a part of it. The souls of the missing passengers weren't gone. They were still aboard, trapped in the ship, bound by the curse that had always followed it. And it wasn't just the ship that was cursed. The ocean around them, the very water they sailed upon, was a part of it too. The Elysian was built over land that had been soaked in desperation. The souls of those who had died there, those who had been taken in the rituals, now walked the halls of the ship, their presence lingering like a fog. They weren't just ghosts. They were a part of the ship, tied to it, bound by the dark magic of the land it was built upon. And now, the Elysian was sailing into that same darkness, carrying those same lost souls with it, unable to escape. The truth had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of luxury and comfort. The Elysian wasn't just a cruise ship. It was a trap, a vessel built over cursed land, carrying the weight of a dark past that would never let go. The disappearances weren't accidents. They were the result of the ship's cursed past coming back to claim those who sailed aboard. And as the ship continued on its journey, it was clear, no one on board was safe. Not until the curse was broken, or until it claimed them all. As the days passed, the atmosphere aboard the Elysian grew heavier with every passing hour. The crew and the remaining passengers were on edge, their nerves fraying with every unexplained sound, every creak of the ship, every strange occurrence that seemed to increase by the minute. No one knew who or what was causing the terror. And with each new disappearance, the fear on board intensified. It was no longer a question of if something would happen, but when. And when it did, it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. One by one, the remaining passengers vanished, their screams lost to the endless expanse of the ocean. The ship, which had once been full of life and laughter, was now eerily silent. The corridors were empty, the dining rooms deserted, and the laughter that had filled the air was replaced by the unsettling sound of footsteps echoing in empty halls. But those footsteps weren't from anyone alive. They were the footsteps of the ship's past, of those who had disappeared before. The crew searched tirelessly, their eyes bloodshot and their minds breaking from the pressure, but no one could find the passengers. No one could explain where they had gone. They had simply vanished, leaving nothing behind. It was as if the Elysian itself had consumed them, taking them into its dark depths, leaving only the echo of their screams to fade away in the wind. Then, in a final, cruel twist, the Elysian itself disappeared. One moment, it was there, a massive shadow on the ocean, casting its long silhouette across the water. And the next, nothing. The ship, along with the final surviving passengers, vanished. No trace, no wreckage, just gone. It wasn't a sinking. It wasn't a crash. There were no signs of an explosion, no wreckage to be found. The Elysian simply disappeared. The ocean swallowed it whole as if it had never been there at all. The storm that had been brewing around it grew violent, with flashes of lightning ripping through the sky, illuminating the sea in eerie white light. The waves crashed against the empty space where the ship had been, and then, silence. All that remained was the vast, endless ocean. The search that followed yielded nothing. No wreckage, no remains, no bodies. It was as though the Elysian had never existed in the first place. The ocean was calm again, almost too calm, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to come back. And still the whispers lingered. Whispers of the ship that disappeared, of the families who vanished, and of the curse that had followed them. What happened aboard the Elysian? Where did it go? What dark force took it? The answers remain lost, drifting in the vastness of the ocean, a mystery that has yet to be solved. No one knows what truly happened to those aboard the Elysian. The mystery surrounding the ship, its disappearance, and the families lost to the ocean remains unsolved. Was it a curse? A supernatural force that followed the ship across the waves? Or was there something even darker at play, something that has yet to be uncovered, something that lies waiting beneath the surface of the ocean, hidden from the world? The disappearance of the Elysian and its passengers has left behind more questions than answers. The ship is gone, but the mystery continues to haunt anyone who dares to ask what happened. The families, the crew, and the ship itself, were they victims of something beyond their understanding, or was there something more insidious at work, something that we have yet to fully grasp? As we sit with the haunting silence of the ocean, the story of the Elysian leaves a lasting mark on all who hear it. But we can only guess at the true nature of the forces that took the ship. Perhaps one day the truth will emerge. Perhaps it's already too late to know for sure. So, what do you believe happened? Was it a curse, a supernatural force, or something far darker? Could it have been a series of coincidences? Or are we dealing with something that the world is simply not ready to understand? Drop your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Hit the notification bell to never miss a chilling new video. You never know, it might just be you next.